Entonces, lo que traje
So
para contarles
I
hoy
try to
es
tell
un poco del
you,
proceso de
I will try to tell you a
mi
bit
trabajo.
about the process
Yo
of my
soy un
work.
escultor
I am a sculptor
y actualmente vivo en Portugal,
and
aquí al lado.
I live in
Tengo mi
Portugal,
estudio
next door
y
nowadays.
también un proyecto que
There is where
al
I have
final
my
de
studio,
la
and I also
exposición le
have
voy
a
a contar.
project about which I will tell you at
Y
the end of
acá
my
arranqué
exhibition.
con una frase que escribí en el año
This is a
2013.
sentence that I wrote
A mí me
in
gusta escribir,
2013.
entonces de vez en cuando
I like to write
tomo
as
un
well.
cuaderno y
So
empiezo
every now and then I
a
take a notebook and I
escribir
write
ideas,
my
pensamientos,
thoughts, my
observaciones también,
ideas,
¿no?
my
Y esto
observations.
dice así, creo
And
en
so
el
it says,
en el poder que depositamos
I
en las cosas y en el
believe
que
in the
nos
power
otorgamos a nosotros
of the
mismos.
power
No somos más
in
que la
which
fuerza de
we
lo que quieren otros y
put
no
the
somos
things
menos que
and
la
the
fuerza
things
que
that
tenemos
we
nosotros
give
mismos.
other people. We are not
Esta imagen
just,
que
we're
ustedes ven a la
only
derecha
the
es una
strength
cerámica
of
que se
what
encuentra
other
en la
people
región
want us to be,
del
and we're
noroeste
not
argentino,
less
donde
than the strength that we are ourselves.
poblaciones indígenas
This has to
que
do
dejaron
with
restos,
indigenous
restos
people
arqueológicos.
as
Esta es
well.
una cerámica negra con unas
Actually,
inscripciones,
indigenous people
unos
have got
grabados
some
en
materials
blanco,
that I like to
de la
work with. This
que
is
de
a
alguna
black and
manera yo
white
fui
ceramic,
como aprendiendo, ¿no?
from which I started my training process and my learning
Y
process.
mi proceso
And my
con el
process
arte
itself with the art
tiene que ver
has to do
desde muchos lugares, ¿no? En
with
primer lugar,
different
con el dibujo,
places.
como cualquier persona,
Firstly, with
cualquier
the
niño,
drawing,
¿no? que se
as
acerca
any
a
child
las producciones
would
plásticas.
start with,
Y,
starting from
y en
drawing,
segundo lugar,
approaching to the arts. And in the
con
second
el
place,
Tucumán
with
de
the
ese momento, ¿no? Donde yo me
Tucumán
formé.
people,
Un Tucumán,
the Tucumán
una
as
ciudad
my
intensa,
education, as my training
y
in an
pequeña, ¿no? Es como la
intensive
ciudad más
way.
pequeña de Argentina,
It's actually
pero también con
the
un Tucumán
smallest
bastante
city in
periférico,
Argentina,
¿no?
the Tucumán
Imagino
city.
que todas las ciudades en el mundo
And I
tienen
imagine
una
that
periferia, ¿no? Entonces, en este caso,
most cities in the world have got
la
outskirts,
recolección de
and I
imágenes
was also in the
que yo
outskirts
fui
of this small
haciendo,
city in Tucumán.
siempre tuvo que
The
ver con
recollections that I've
con
been
habitar estos
doing
lugares, ¿no?
always
pieza,
has to
por
do
ejemplo, es
with
del año 2016,
inhabiting
se llama
this
Irene,
space. This piece
mide
is
2
called
metros,
Irene, and
por
it's
1
2
metro
months,
y por 50
2
centímetros
meters
más o menos.
tall.
Y el año 2016
It's done
es
in 2016,
fundamental para
and this year
la
is
historia
essential
argentina, por lo menos,
for the Argentinian
porque se
history
celebró los
because
200 años de
it's the
independencia
anniversary of 200 years of
de
independence
España, ¿no?
from the Spanish Empire.
Entonces, les cuento brevemente un
And
poco
I'm
la
just
historia de
telling
cómo
you
surge esta
briefly
imagen.
to tell you how this
Me
image
invitaron a hacer
emerges.
una
I was
escultura, en
invited to
realidad,
do a sculpture
celebrando los 200 años de
celebrating
historia,
the
¿no?
200 years of
Finalmente, el texto
independence.
donde me invitaban
The
explicaba un
place
poco y
where I was
repetía muchas
invited
veces 200 años de historia.
was
Entonces,
repeating all
a
the
mí me
time the
llamó mucho la
200
atención
years of
eso,
history.
la
And
cantidad de
I
veces que repetía y repetía 200
this actually
años de
struck
historia.
me, the way that they were
Yo venía
repeating
trabajando en
and
otros
highlighting the
formatos, haciendo
200 years,
instalaciones y
the
tratando
200
de
years
encontrarme
of
como artista, ¿no?
independence, and I tried to find myself
formas,
as
imágenes.
an artist
Y
in this
para mí esto fue
idea,
fundamental.
and
Cuando
this
ingresé a la
was
universidad,
essential to
mi
me.
deseo era ser como Rodin o un escultor
My
así como
desire was
de gran
actually when I was
envergadura,
going
¿no?
to university
Finalmente
was
no lo estaba
becoming
consiguiendo hasta ese momento.
Rodin or some of these famous
Y algo que
sculptures,
pasó
and I was
fue
failing
que
to do so,
empecé a
doing
unir
so. So
cosas
I
que
tried
por un lado
to
a mí me
link
interesaban, pero que
things
yo
that I
no
was
las
interested
mezclaba con el
at,
proceso artístico,
but
¿no?
that I would never
por
link
ejemplo,
them
¿no? A mí
to
siempre me gustó la
the
arqueología,
artistic process.
pero
Because, for example, I like
nunca lo había
archaeology,
asociado,
but I never
eh,
associated
era como una cosa
archaeology
freak
to
que
art.
tenía y que
It was
observaba,
most
¿no?
like I felt like a
Entonces,
freak,
en ese momento,
like an
el
artist
texto
freak when it comes to
me
archaeology, and I have never
molestó en realidad, ¿no?
thought about
Me
associating
molestó
these two.
que
And
no,
I was actually bothered
no hiciera
by
hincapié en
the fact
en
that
todo en toda la historia, o como si hubiese
the
existido
history
una prehistoria argentina,
would
¿no?
never
Eso me parecía
highlight
como que
this because
no,
they,
no necesariamente desde la institución
from the
del
institutions, it
Estado,
seemed like they would never
no
recognize
estaba
the
presente
prehistory of
ese relato,
Argentina,
ni siquiera
and
estaba
this
como parte de
narrative
una
was not
invitación
recognized
a
officially.
algo que,
It wasn't politically
a un campo
correct.
como el arte, ¿no?
So I
Entonces,
thought
en ese momento,
this is something that actually bothered
yo me
me.
acordé de muchas
And I
anécdotas.
thought about so many
De ese
different
modo como que
stories,
también construyo mi trabajo, ¿no? Como tratando de hacer memoria todo el
because
tiempo.
this is also part of my
Entonces
process.
llamé a
I
mi
try to
madre
remember things.
y
And I
desde
called
Buenos
my
Aires
mom
y
from
le
Buenos
volví a
Aires,
preguntar
and I
historias
asked her
sobre mi abuela.
about my
Cuando hablo de mi
granny.
abuela también
And when I talk about
al
my
final de la
granny,
exposición voy a
at the
voy a
end
continuar
of
charlando.
my speech, I will
Entonces,
tell you more about my granny.
Irene fue el resultado
But
de eso, ¿no? Como
in a nutshell, Irene
de
was the
ese
result
texto, de
of
esa
this
invitación
text, of this
y del
invitation,
impulso que me
of
dio ese
this
texto para
boost that was given
reencontrarme
to
de
me
nuevo
by
con
this
piezas
text
arqueológicas como las que
for
mostré al
me
principio.
to find myself again with archaeological
Y de alguna
pieces.
manera yo sentía que esas cerámicas que
And
estaban,
somehow
que
I
están
felt
aún en
that
los
these
museos de
pieces of
Argentina,
ceramics
y
that are
en
still
muchos de ellos
in the
están con las
museums
luces
of
apagadas
Argentina,
o
and many
llenas de
of them
polvo,
are
¿no?
actually
O con poca información
full of
también.
dust or not
Me
appropriately
estaban hablando, ¿no?
lighted.
Me
I
estaban
felt they were
comunicando
talking
algo.
to me, they were trying to
Entonces,
communicate with me
para
these pieces of
continuar
art
un poco
and to
con el
continue
proceso
this
picasiano, si se quiere,
Picasian
a mí siempre me
process that we
impactó
are
mucho
talking
cómo las
about.
vanguardias
I was
observaban
always very surprised about the
las
avant-garde
piezas de otras
pieces
culturas, ¿no?
of other cultures.
Entonces, mientras estudiaba historia
And
del arte
while I
en la
was
universidad,
studying history
me
of art
encantaba
at
como
university,
saber que existían
I
esos
actually
procesos
liked to
de
know
aprendizaje, ¿no?
that these
Entonces hice lo mismo, iba a los
education
museos
processes
de
existed.
arqueología en Buenos
And the
Aires
same
o en
thing goes for
Tucumán o en el noroeste de
Argentina,
Argentina,
for
y con carbonilla me
archaeology in
ponía a dibujar
Argentina.
cada una de las piezas,
The
¿no?
way I
Tratando de hacer
started
una mímesis al
drawing
principio y
each
después una
piece
síntesis.
at
Entonces
the
así
beginning,
surgió esta pieza. Se
and
llama
that's
Irene,
how
tiene un
this
huevo de gallina
Irene
en el centro,
piece
en esto que es como una
emerged.
vulva, tiene dos
It has
patitas
an egg in the
y
middle,
está
like
basada
a sort
también
of vulva.
en los
Also, it's got
suplicantes.
two
Los suplicantes son
ducklings,
unas piezas pequeñas
and also two
de una
breasts.
cultura
The
que está en el valle de Catamarca.
These are
Catamarca
pieces from a
en el noroeste
culture
argentino.
placed in
Esta se
Catamarca, in
llama
one of the
Patricia.
mountains in
La
Argentina.
siguiente pieza que yo hice en el
This
Museo
one
Arte
is called
Moderno.
Patricia.
Ahí pueden ver
It's
las
from
diferentes
2017,
vistas.
and you can
Esta
see the
pieza
different
parece
perspectives
un
of the
horno de
same
barro,
pieces.
pero no lo es,
It,
¿no?
it
El
actually
material
looks
con el
like
que está hecho es
like an
estructura de
oven,
metal
like
y adobe, ¿no? Como
a
se hace en
kiln,
la,
but it's
se hacía
not.
en las antiguas casas.
It's not a mud kiln, actually.
Y lo que yo hice fue
It resembles the
básicamente
kind of ovens that
combinar
were used in the
dos
past.
formas, ¿no?
But what I try to do is to
Pero al
combine
mismo
two
tiempo tomarme las
things, but at the
licencias
same
de cambio de
time
escala y
to
también
change the scale
de
legitimately,
imaginar nuevas formas, ¿no?
and
A
also
partir
to
de
imagine new ways, new forms
acá,
from
se la ve,
this
por ejemplo, de
object.
frente,
Here is the
tiene
front.
tetas,
You can see
tres bocas y
the
un piso, ¿no?
breasts, three mouths.
Cuando hice esta muestra que se llama Patricia,
When I actually made
tiene
this
el nombre de mi hermana, en
piece,
realidad,
Patricia,
yo empecé a
this is
darle
my
nombres
sister's
de
name,
familiares
actually.
míos,
I try to give them
porque en el
names
proceso, mientras
from
yo
my
iba
family,
haciendo estas esculturas,
because
también iba
in the
descubriendo un
process
montón
of doing
de
sculptures,
cosas
I was also discovering so
que
many
me hacían pensar
things
sobre
about
mi
my
propia práctica
my
y
family
sobre
life, and
mi propia
that made me
condición de
think
clase,
about
¿no?
my
Es algo que
class
me parece
condition,
fundamental contarlo,
my
contarles a
class
ustedes.
situation, and I think this is
Porque
fundamental,
todo
this is
esta,
essential for me to tell you,
imaginario
because all this
tiene que ver,
imaginary has to do
con la mezcla
with the
de
mix
información que no
of
solamente me dio la historia
information,
del arte y la
not
formación
only
académica, sino
given to me by history
la,
of art
la,
or
el
by
imaginario
academia,
que
but also
absorbí
the
de,
imaginary
Tucumán
that
que le contaba,
I
¿no?
absorbed from the Tucumán background that I was telling to you, that I was telling you about.
Me había pasado algo con la curadora,
And when it comes to
con
this
Laura Hacker, me
piece,
acuerdo que
Laura
fue la
Hacker,
curadora de
the
esta exposición, y
curator
nosotros
of this
discutíamos mucho
exhibition,
sobre la
and I
exposición.
were
Y
discussing
una
a
de las
lot
cosas
about
es que
the
yo le
exhibition,
decía
and
que
one of
había
the
quedado
things is
con
that I
una
was
frustración un poco,
telling her that I was a bit
porque
frustrated
me había cansado un poco
because
de
I
la
was
metáfora en
tired
el
of the
arte, ¿no?
metaphor of the art.
Entonces pensaba que
And I thought
esta muestra me
that
gustaba, por
this
ejemplo,
exhibition, this
pero que
piece,
finalmente
I
no
liked,
cumplía
but
esas
finally
expectativas. Yo estaba
it
muy
did not
fascinado por los artistas de
meet the
vanguardia y
expectations
sobre
that
todo
I
por
had.
la
I was fascinated
vanguardia
by the
rusa, ¿no?
avant-garde, especially
Y cómo
Russian
llevaron la
avant-garde,
práctica
and
hacia
how
a
they
convertir eso en otra
actually
disciplina útil, ¿no?
implemented the practice into a
Y
discipline.
entonces al año siguiente
On the
me
next year,
invitaron
I was invited to a very small town in the Andes mountain range. It's called the Rioja. It's also in the west of Argentina. And they have a festival that had nothing to do with contemporary art. It was a festival that mixes a lot of aspects, cinema, anthropology, popular knowledge, and so on. And these people that organized the festival saw my previous sculpture in Buenos Aires, and they thought the discussion that I had with Laura in that moment, because they called me on the phone. Oh no, they actually sent me a message on Facebook, and they said something in the line of, we would like you to come to our festival because we think that you can be useful here, you can be helpful. So I said yes. I wasn't bothered actually by the festival being outside the parameters in which I was moving at the moment, because I was actually based in Buenos Aires and moving around Tucumán. So I was in this process, and I was not contemplating going so far away from that circuit. But it didn't bother me. So I went there, I went to this town, and it was a very incredible process. It was also very tiring, because I started to unlearn. When I say unlearn, I mean with all the questions that were discussed with Laura that had to do with what we think about art, and how other people think about images from other cultures. So in this town, what happened to me was that I came across a ceramist, an image producer that had learned to do ceramics, finding archaeological remains in the mountains. And it was these archaeological remains, the ones that helped him learn the ceramic techniques, because he didn't have any professors, any school. So he took me home and he showed me his house museum that he made the pieces while he was walking around the town. And to me, this was amazing. His name was Martinez. The speeches with these artists made me think that the production of images, or what I thought at the moment about an artist that was integrating in Buenos Aires, had nothing to do, or had nothing to do necessarily with this iconographic context that we call history of art, but rather there are some producers, image producers, that are outside this narrative, and that they connect, however, in the same creative way than any of us could do. So, something that happened to me with Sonia, this is another sister of mine, actually, I have so many siblings, as you can see. So this piece is called Sonia, like my sister, and here we are assembling the oven. This is a mud church that was abandoned, and we decided to do it here. This is an ancient church that was destroyed next to a Catholic church. Actually, the town has 100 people. 100 inhabitants and 2 churches. So Sonia was the process of constructing art in a very different atmosphere. This was a cooperative festival. Every person had to contribute with something. I was so patient to find the materials, because I had to wait for people to find me the materials. I was used to live in a city, so this was very different to me. One of the women that were helping me as a public, as an audience, for the Sonia piece, asked me, how are you gonna put a face in the oven? Because a lot of people have got an oven, a mud oven like this, and she was telling me something that struck me. And she said, I had no idea that oven could be built in a different way. And this project that was that counted with the collaboration of Diego Núñez in the district of La Boca in Buenos Aires. If you don't know this district, it's very interesting. It's a migrant district from Italian people in the 20th century. And it's a very popular district, La Boca. Also, there are a lot of migrants living here, still from Peru, from Bolivia, Tucumans as well, because I was living in La Boca for so many years, and I was feeling very comfortable there, actually, at the city, in the city of Buenos Aires, in this La Boca district. This piece that you are seeing is actually based in a portrait, an iconic portrait that is in La Boca district. If I'm going very fast with the image, let me know with the slides. So these signs in blue and yellow says justice for Diego Núñez. Stop the killings, because this is actually a reivindication from the town. And when I was actually living in La Boca in 2018, once I woke up, I went to the supermarket, I was walking around, and I went to Buenos Aires, and Cecile, the curator of Buenos Aires, she came to my study in La Boca, and I told her a little bit about this portrait, because I thought it was very surprising, not because of what they say, but because the way it was painted. I am very fascinated by the forms. And this has been made in an urgent way, I think. So finally, I decided to do an oven that had to do the name of Diego. And an oven or a kiln that would be extended to my family use, for example. And I actually asked them if I could work with the name of Diego, with the name of their son. I asked the family, and they told me that anything that would make it visual, that would make this case, gave this case visibility for people that actually died the same way as Diego, they would welcome any action that would actually give visibility to the way Diego died, and together with Diego, so many other people that were killed the same way. And it made me think of Gertrude Stein as well, because I wanted to do a kiln, an oven, a kiln. And so I was very scared to disrespect the family, so to speak. Maybe for anyway, we actually made this oven next to the river on the street. We decided to cook food, because basically the ceramic kiln is not only for decoration purposes, but also to do stuff. We were actually doing some dumplings and pizzas inside the kiln. We spent some hours in front of the kiln, and people were actually approaching because we were giving food for free, because it was part of the project. And so people were curious to see what we were doing in this huge form that they didn't know what it was in La Boca, in the district. Everybody knew about Diego, because Diego signs were everywhere. And this is the case for so many young people that died because he was shot 5 times from the back, and it's a case that was never official, and so the family still claims for justice. And I find familiarity between Diego and my own work and my own person, because somehow La Boca district was a comfortable place for me, unlike any other places where I lived. And the reason why this is so is because in this place I could breathe an intensity that would actually take me to my home city, not because of the intensity, but because of the problematic situations. They were very similar. For example, one of Diego Núñez's professors was talking to the students about Diego Núñez, and he placed a sign in Diego Núñez at school, and he started talking about institutional violence and where the cases of institutional violence were in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and most of them were in La Boca. So he said to his students, "Don't you think this is strange? Because you might be the next victim." And this is another project that I carried out in the school of the district where Maradona was born, in Buenos Aires, actually. The woman that's next to the teenager in red is called Lorena Bossi, and she's a teacher, an essential teacher for this project to take place. Because this woman managed to transform an stigmatized school in which there were so much violence in the outskirts of Buenos Aires. She managed to transform this school into an art school. So she started to implement, she invited me to go there to talk to the students, and for 3 months we were working on this kiln. She had a very particular teaching style, and what happened is that students started to stay at school. Even on Sundays, they were jumping off the fence because they want to go to school. Before, it was a violent place, and nowadays it's an art place. So this simple transformation managed for a lot of teenagers to go back to school. Nowadays, the process is different because students go from high school with the desire to enter university, but the university is a different place. Here, I like to tell you about the genealogy of the forms. The engineering of necessity, as I said before. The genealogy of form is a concept that arises from my formal research, from what I need, and it has to do with the observations that I do about the creative processes that take place in the outskirts, how people solve these processes. The engineering of necessity is actually a knowledge that humanity has by nature, in a natural way, but it's important to highlight it because it's a way for humanity to solve questions that have to do with art, but also some other fields. This exhibition is from 2018. It's called The Genealogy of Form, and it was in Buenos Aires as well. I actually worked with Andrea Fernandez, is a friend, a curator, a researcher, and an artist with whom I worked on this main piece. This is the piece that is called like the exhibition, genealogy of the form. And it's like a circuit that I assembled. I wanted to do like a bakery, a place where bread is made. So we have like two heaters with two stoves with an electric resistance that are actually framing the circuits of different stoves that look like industrial mud pieces, clay pieces. And this is the landscape that I saw from my home because I was inspired by the abandoned area of Buenos Aires, all the port, abandoned industrial area. That was the landscape that I used to watch, that I used to see from my home window. This piece has got some holes as well, and I imagine some musicality in the functioning of the piece. The two characters that were in the front are smoking marijuana, actually in the piece. And this is a piece that I made in 2018. But I'm telling you the pieces and I'm telling you a little bit about the history, not so much about the process, but about what the moment meant for me, for my research called the genealogy of form. And like I was saying, I was teaching, I was working in La Boca, and I was also teaching in a cardboard cooperative. The cardboard collectors are actually people that recycle cardboard, and there were so many during the crisis in Argentina. And so I was offered these jobs as a teacher, and I also started to visit some kitchens in Buenos Aires, in the La Boca neighborhood, just because I was curious, not because I was an activist. I like to say this because I was actually presented, I was actually introduced as a neighbor, as an artist. So sometimes I was accompanying them for marches, for justice, and I was invited so many different times. But with time, I realized that what I really wanted and what I was really trying to find in these places were actually these, because most groups had saucepans and kitchen menage that was very big. Because they cook a lot, and because marches and social movements involve a lot of people, and these people have to eat. And from that moment, these projects emerged, and I started asking people about the history of the pan, because they didn't want to tell me the story, because when I asked the question, they found it ridiculous, because they were actually using the pan for, their activism. And here it was an artist that came along asking about their pan and their kitchen menage, wanted to sit with them and to talk to them about this. Like I said at the beginning, I like archaeology a lot because of the research method of archaeology. And so the grouping and the interviews were amazing, because they always have some intense moments, sensibility moments as well, because every time they used to tell me some injury, some pain, or the stains of the pan and the injuries of the pan. By telling me the injuries of the pan, they were telling me the injuries of their social movement. They were telling me the reivindication, the claims of their social movements. And so I made a parallelism between the indigenous struggle from the northwest in Argentina. For example, these faces in these pans were actually taken from the ceramics, and I tried to do a collage to transform to aluminum the name of every social movement, the year they were born, and the name, the main name. And why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because what happened to me was actually the fact that when I realized during the marches for justice, I actually realized that both Diego Núñez, but also the people belonging to these groups, all the groups, and the history that they were telling me, they were very similar and they were very close to my own personal history. And so I realized the genealogy of form had to do with this, with something that the archaeology used to call the archaeological lake or gap. That happens when, for example, in archaeology, when they are missing some sort of material, they try to fill in the gap with another material. And this, with my pieces of art, an historical process was repeated, because in most cases these populations were dark-skinned. And when I was trying to observe through the investigation of art, is that indigenous people that I was approaching from an archaeological point of view almost, they were living and they were claiming justice and they were being organized. So this was essential to me, because I raised the awareness of belonging to a particular class, and to insist about an elitist world as it is the art world. This piece is called Support to Speed. I was actually working in Berlin on the following year, and it's based on the popular economy. I mean, here you have popular economy. I'm talking about businesses that happen outside the establishment that somehow are generating a personal, a community economy. And so I made a kiln bike that has all the elements that are based in these images that I like to see every now and then. And I would like to conclude with this. It says, I follow the visibility as if it was the light of a reflector in movement, and now that they are looking at me, I feel I would need to say something that's not about me, but the truth is that everything has to do with me, and at the same time, I don't think so. What if autobiographic art is rather the history of other people piercing us? This piece I did in New York. It's called Mamachono, and it has so many different functions. Mamachono is actually a name that's given in it's a negative name for poor single women that like to go partying and they are single mothers. It's a pejorative name actually in Argentina. And I named this piece like that. It's actually 4.5 meters tall. This is another piece that was exhibited in Venice, and I was telling you about my granny in my education. I actually didn't meet my granny physically, but her stories came to me when I was a child, and she was a ceramist. Not so long ago in Buenos Aires, I was awarded an award for ceramics, but I never consider myself to be a ceramist. I actually don't know the technique. These are mud pieces and are based in the observations that I do about the ceramics. And these pieces, I always think about them in movement because I like the futurism, for example. And I think there is something in movement that I like, for example, the bike that I was telling you about, that I name as Barner painting, Julia the Steam and the Speed. This piece of art is actually named Rosario Liendros. This is my granny's name. It's the first time that I name a piece of work with a name and a surname. And I thought, because this was exhibited in Buenos Aires, I thought I could afford to name this piece my grandmother, as my grandmother. So to speak, I consider this to be my own genealogy because I don't have many pictures or many information about my family, and it's not just personal, it happens to a lot of people in Buenos Aires, in my country. This is José Pascual Chaile, this is my dad. And Pedro Chaile is my grandfather, he's there as well. This is like my family group, so to speak. And I like to conclude with my last project that's taking place in Lisbon. I live there ever since the pandemic. On the left-hand side, we see a picture of a Mexican cook. That's my friend. A very good friend of mine, and we are actually working with Joaquín Millone, another Argentinian artist. We are actually making this project. It's like we want to do like a stand, like a standing movement. We still don't know what form it's gonna have. This is a prototype. The yellow space that you can see on the left-hand side is a meeting space that is generated within the exhibition, and it's called Study for the Functioning of People through the functioning of things through art. And this is where we were actually discussing how can we think this piece, how can we arrange this piece of art that tries to reflect different things, and how we can actually work together to implement a project that's both art and activism. And this is something that is not finished, but this is what I'm investigating now in Europe. Thank you so much.